Imagine, just for a second, boarding a totally routine overnight flight. You know the drill. The cabin lights dim, the jet engines settle into that familiar hum, and absolutely everything seems perfectly, completely normal. But then, less than an hour after takeoff, the aircraft just vanishes. It literally disappears from the radar. And despite triggering the absolute largest, most comprehensive search operation in the entire history of aviation, the main wreckage is never found. Over a decade later, it's still one of history's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving deep into the timeline, the mind-boggling search efforts, the key pieces of evidence, and the major theories surrounding a vanishing act that literally shocked the world.
So that's the multi-billion-dollar question we're exploring today, right? What really happened to Flight MH370? It's this massive, haunting question that has completely stumped investigators, aviation experts, and of course the heartbroken families of those on board for years now. To wrap our heads around how a massive modern airliner can just evaporate into thin air, we really need to look closely at the data and follow the timeline exactly as it played out.
Part 1. A routine overnight flight.
Okay, so let's set the scene, and I really want you to notice just how completely unremarkable this setup was. It was March 8, 2014. We've got a Boeing 777-200ER, which, by the way, is one of the absolute safest, most reliable wide-body jets ever built, prepping for a standard red-eye flight from Kuala Lumpur over to Beijing. On board, 239 people. We're talking tourists heading home, business travelers, families. The weather was totally clear, and the crew was incredibly experienced. Seriously, there were zero red flags. It was, by every single metric, a perfectly routine departure.
Part 2. The Last Contact.
So the flight is cruising along into the night, right? They reach the very edge of Malaysian airspace. We get this completely routine last radio communication, a perfectly normal, calm sign-off at 1:19 a.m. The pilot says, "Good night, Malaysian 370. But then, almost immediately after that sign-off, the aircraft abruptly vanishes from civilian radar screens. The plane's transponder, the device that constantly broadcasts its location, identity, and altitude to air traffic control, just goes silent. It's literally as if someone reached over and flipped a switch. But here's the crazy part. That wasn't the end of the plane's journey. Later on, when experts analyzed military radar data, they found a chilling detail. The aircraft had severely deviated from its flight path to Beijing and made a sharp turn back across the Malay Peninsula. After that, a complete and total loss of all communications. No distress signals, no emergency calls, just absolute silence.
Part 3. The massive global search. Now, when a giant commercial airliner carrying 239 people goes silent and completely off course, the reaction is going to be monumental. And it was. We are talking about over $1 billion spent in what practically overnight became the largest search operation in the history of aviation. Dozens of countries teamed up, pooling their resources. They deployed massive fleets of ships, they scoured the ocean surface with specialized aircraft, and eventually they even sent these highly advanced underwater drones down to map parts of the seafloor that were basically unexplored. I mean, we're talking plunging into freezing, pitch-black depths up to 4,000 meters down. This wasn't just a quick search that wrapped up in a few weeks. It was an agonizing, multi-year effort covering these vast, incredibly hostile stretches of open ocean.
Part 4. Following the clues.
So you might be wondering, how on earth did searchers even know where to look in an ocean that vast, especially when the plane had totally vanished from radar? Well, when the primary communications failed, investigators had to fall back on a completely automated system. And this brings us to something called the satellite handshake. Even though the flight's main comms were dark, a data unit on the aircraft just kept automatically exchanging these tiny electronic signals, or pings, with a satellite network orbiting the Earth. Think of it kind of like your cell phone silently checking in with a cell tower, even when it's just sitting in your pocket and you aren't making a call. These automated pings, they became the absolute most critical breadcrumbs in the entire investigation.
By obsessively studying these digital breadcrumbs, investigators started piecing together a fascinating, albeit incredibly tragic picture. It was like a giant puzzle. First, engineers and mathematicians essentially had to work backward. By calculating the microscopic delays in the signal travel time from those handshakes, they were able to estimate a likely flight path, and it pointed way down south. Second, years later, actual physical debris, pieces confirmed to be from that exact Boeing 777, finally started washing ashore on the coastlines of Africa and on islands in the western Indian Ocean. Third, scientists took the locations where that debris was found and ran advanced ocean drift analysis. They were effectively using the ocean's currents to rewind the clock. And finally, step 4. By combining that raw satellite data with the complex oceanography, investigators concluded that the aircraft most likely flew until it completely ran out of fuel, ending its journey somewhere in the incredibly remote, deep waters of the southern Indian Ocean.
Part 5. Theories of the disappearance.
Now, with the final location narrowed down, but the main wreckage itself still totally missing, the void of hard facts has naturally been filled with a lot of hypotheses. I want you to look closely at the status side here, because I need to be incredibly clear. Every single one of these is a theory, not a proven fact. Investigators have heavily scrutinized pilot involvement, trying to figure out if someone in the cockpit deliberately altered the course. They've looked deep into the possibility of a sudden, catastrophic mechanical failure. They checked out the idea of severe cabin depressurization, which could have knocked out the crew and passengers, turning it into a so-called ghost flight flying on autopilot. They've considered a rapid, devastating fire that might have melted the comms equipment. They've even investigated hijacking and a bunch of other speculative ideas. But notice the status for every single one. Investigated, unproven. Without recovering those flight recorders, the black boxes, absolutely none of these theories can be stated as fact. We are simply tracing the incredibly frustrating avenues investigators were forced to walk down.
Part 6. An enduring mystery.
So, why after all this time, all this unprecedented effort, and over $1 billion, does it remain unsolved? Well, first and foremost, those missing flight recorders. Without the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, we just have zero direct insight into the condition of the plane or what the crew is actually doing in those final hours. Second, we have highly limited physical evidence. A few scattered pieces of debris tell us the plane definitely crashed, sure, but they don't tell us why. Third, that search area in the southern Indian Ocean is just unbelievably vast. It's deep, the weather's awful, and it features treacherous underwater mountainous terrain. It's literally one of the hardest places on Earth to search. All of these massive hurdles combined mean we are left staring at numerous, painful, unanswered questions.
Over a decade has come and gone, yet Flight MH370 undeniably remains one of history's greatest, most baffling unsolved mysteries. Somewhere down there, beneath the dark, freezing waters of the Indian Ocean, might lie the exact answers that the families of those 239 passengers and crew have been desperately waiting to hear. But until that day comes, and the main wreckage is finally located, MH370 remains this haunting enigma that just continues to fascinate and perplex the entire world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Based on the hard data, the bizarre timeline, and the various theories we've unpacked today, what do you actually think happened to Flight MH370? Let me know your thoughts and your own hypotheses down in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one.